Tua is back in the concussion protocol for officially the second time, seemingly related to when he struck his head on the field earlier this weekend. But after what certainly seems to be his third head injury, I think there's a real conversation here to be had about whether or not he should return at all this season. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and if you're new here and enjoy learning about the underlying medical side of the sports world, then please consider subscribing to learn about all future injuries and sports medicine scenarios. Big shout out to the Twitter user who initially highlighted this video and sort of pointed out after the fact now that this is likely the injury moment, so to speak, of what put Tua back in the protocol. Of course, he strikes the back of his head on the field, something that, again, we can see and have it not cause a head injury, but he stayed in the game. I don't think any fault to anybody there in the moment because it's very reasonable to believe that concussion symptoms can be delayed. I think we have to highlight a good job on Tua's part in the Dolphins medical staff here. First of all, just for recognizing and realizing, hey, we need to evaluate these things. Tua reporting his symptoms, the medical staff taking it seriously, and then taking that big, hard step to put him back in the protocol. So good job by them. Good job by Tua. That's a positive here just to start off. But now the serious conversation. If I have an athlete I'm taking care of in my clinic and they suffer 3 concussions during one season, I'm not going to clear them to return that same year. The challenge with concussions is everybody's affected by them a little bit differently. And there's no way for us to know what the exact threshold is for when somebody will have significant enough side effects versus what another person really might not be impacted by. One concussion for you could have life-altering effects compared to 5 concussions for me might not make that much of a difference down the road. We have no way of knowing that in the moment. We certainly all believe that more concussions are bad, and when you get to something like 5, 6, 7 in a season, that's definitely too harmful, but there's no clear number where the literature or the organizations will tell all of us this is what you must abide by in terms of when you can no longer clear an athlete to return. It's sort of left up to each of us individually. So for most of us, that line tends to be somewhere at like 3, 4 concussions where we're going to strongly consider not clearing somebody to return. But there's no like textbook answer. There's no hard and fact rule or number where we say, oh, you hit this threshold, you're done for the year, and every doctor follows that same practice. Of course, the big thing with Tua here is the Dolphins still do not consider this first play against Buffalo where he went down, struck the back of his head, had that brief sort of rigid response with his fingers. We saw him stumble as he got up. They still are not considering that a concussion. So in their minds, this is just the second time he's been in the protocol, which sort of gets them out of some of that difficult conversation. But I think we all saw it. We all know what we saw. And so we need to have that conversation ourselves. The second concussion was clear and obvious to everybody, but we shouldn't be required to see something this severe with the hand posturing to confidently say that somebody's had a concussion and for everybody to believe that it was a head injury. A final asterisk here is remember that people can be put in the concussion protocol for something other than a head injury concussion. Perfect example, Matthew Stafford recently was in the concussion protocol, but then we found out it was because of a neck injury. So hopefully if that's the case for Tua, the Dolphins will come out and say it because otherwise we have no choice but to assume that this is because of a concussion. The only real historic example of this I can point to that's even somewhat similar is with Wes Welker. I'm not aware of any NFL player who's had 3 confirmed diagnosed concussions during the same season. Of course, I'm sure there's a ton of athletes who had concussions that just weren't recognized, maybe symptoms were reported, but talking about 3 officially diagnosed concussions. Welker had 3, but I believe it was in a 10-month period as opposed to in that same season. And of course, they had a very significant effect on him and his career. There's a great quote in this USA Today article about Welker kind of describing that struggle with concussions from this neurologist, Dr. Kevin Crutchfield, saying every time you get a concussion, it's like withdrawing money from an ATM. But the problem is you don't know how much money you have in your account. And that's the real issue here. It gets back to that point of how we don't know how one concussion is going to affect each individual person. And so we have to err on the side of player health and safety and have some threshold for at which point we won't allow them to potentially have another head injury during that period when the brain is likely still recovering. If you talk to 10 different sports medicine doctors, you might get 10 slightly different answers in terms of how they would manage a situation like this. But feet to the fire for me, if someone has 3 concussions in a season, I'm not going to clear them to return that same year. Even at 2 concussions, I'm starting to at least have that conversation of, look, this might be getting to a point where it could be too risky for your long-term health. Unfortunately, I think the Dolphins are going to escape a lot of this conversation because they are still saying that that first one wasn't officially a concussion. And so in their books, this is just number 2 for Tua, which, while concerning, doesn't reach that threshold where I think we should be talking about not playing the rest of the year. But I want you all to still be having these conversations and have some food for thought about these types of issues. Because again, people watching this are going to have concussions themselves, might have kids with a concussion. And I think it's important that we sort of take what we're seeing in the professional sports world and really make it more applicable to our everyday life. Because I can guarantee if you have a kid in high school who has 3 concussions during that fall football season, their doctor's probably not going to let them return that same year. I hope this video helps to spur some conversation about this. I hope we hear more information from the Dolphins about what they're going to do the rest of the year, or some of that conversation they've had with Tua about returning or keeping him out, because we need to keep having these conversations. It's extremely important to help advance the safety of the sport. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know, as always, any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.